I may be but small, but I will die a colossus.
Alright, welcome back to Honored Madman, and I'm the host, Honored Madman. So I figured it would be good to do one last video about Miquella before the DLC comes out and makes it irrelevant. But I figure the point is to try and compile all the various lore theories and information about this mysterious demigod that we can, and try to jump to some conclusions before this DLC comes out in probably less than a week. So Miquella, we all know he's one of the later children of Queen Marika and herself, Radahn. Both him and his twin sister Malenia were born corrupted in some form by another outer god force. Malenia was born with the bud of the ancient rot outer god inside her, and Miquella was mysteriously born as this forever child. Now we're not really sure which outer god is doing this to Miquella, but he doesn't seem to have let his condition hold him back. In fact, he's probably one of the most accomplished demigods in the lore. Now, the important distinction here between Miquella and other demigods is that he and his sister were the only Empyreans outside of Radahn, who of course slew her Empyrean flesh and now exists as a disembodied ghostly apparition that possesses a doll with 4 arms. Radahn would have been Miquella's much older half-sister, and from what I gather they were apparently on friendly terms, at least judging by Ranni's reaction at seeing Torrent hale and hearty. And as we now know, Miquella was the original rider of Torrent. Radahn even claims to have been entrusted with those wolf spirit ashes by Torrent's previous owner to give to his new owner. But I'm getting off track. Anyway, Miquella, being the youngest demigod along with his sister Malenia, and obviously he had his own problems. I mean, he was stuck in a kid body for all eternity, and that's a pretty big problem for anybody. Just ask that kid vampire from Skyrim. But Miquella didn't focus at first on his problems, he focused on the problems of others. First and foremost was his sister's rot affliction, which actually turned out to be a divine essence, or at the very least the seed or bud of one. This was due to the influence of a very old outer god known as the Old Rot God, or at least that's what I call it. Now Miquella, being the kind-hearted young soul that he was, did everything in his power to try and reverse this rotting sickness that afflicted his sister. And he really did. He used everything under the Golden Order in an effort to cure her, but to no avail. In this kid, he was a prodigy. He came up with his own series of Golden Order incantations, although they could do nothing for his sister, so he ultimately turned his back on the Golden Order entirely, which probably made Radahn sad a little bit, but probably pleased Marika. His incantation's inability to cure his sister revealed another truth. Whatever was affecting Malenia, this scarlet rot, was not of the Golden Order or the erdtree, and therefore had to come from some meddling outer source. And this would of course lead to Miquella developing a substance known as unalloyed gold. It's not quite clear how he created it or developed it, but what is known is that it has the unique property of preventing outer god interference. It prevented his sister from completely rotting away from that scarlet rot of hers, and she took quite a liking to the substance, arming her knights in unalloyed gold armor to prevent them from succumbing to her rotting sickness. A lot of good that did them. Miquella also commissioned various prosthetic arms and legs, some with retractable blades, all for his beloved twin sister. I mean, it makes sense. She was in many ways one of his aces in the hole, and he needed to keep her in fighting form. Now, there's a bit of a duality to how Miquella is described as this kind, loving guy. It's always described with a slightly intimidating air, if you will. For example, his sister Malenia refers to him as the most fearsome empyrean, which, I mean, he is sort of indirectly responsible for the desolation of Caelid, but that's a whole other story. And in that now famous voice clip from the first trailer we got for Shadow of the Erdtree, we have that guy describe what exactly Miquella is capable of doing.
Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying.
Yeah, there's nothing more terrifying. And the description of the bewitching branch sort of subtly backs this up with its wording. So we know he's formidable and not in the conventional sense, since he's stuck in a little kid body. And we can actually kind of use this knowledge to re-examine just about everything Miquella is said to have been responsible for. So, from the beginning, he experienced everything the Golden Order had to offer and was left wanting since it couldn't cure his sister. He would then gather his vast and diverse group of followers, basically the outcasts, mostly all those who were excluded by the Golden Order and the erdtree, beings who were considered impure, and he offered them asylum in his new lands he was setting shop in, the consecrated snowfield. And surely his nobles and other knights and soldiers made the trip with him, but I think it's safe to say that beings like the Misbegotten and the Albinorics and those guys had to find their own way to the lands of the Hallowed Tree where they were welcomed. But Miquella essentially, or presumably, set his sights on creating a new world logic that actually was, well, for lack of a better term, all-inclusive, unlike the Golden Order and likely the previous orders that preceded it. The infamous Knight of Black Knives, however, would essentially complicate things. Amongst other demigods, the most famous and firstborn of America herself, Godwyn the Golden, was one of the casualties, along with Ranni, the other empyrean. Now, Miquella was particularly fond of Godwyn. Some even believe this statue at the Hallowed Tree depicts Godwyn embracing Miquella and Malenia. I'm not entirely convinced, but I guess who else is it supposed to be? It doesn't look like America, and it doesn't look like Radahn. Godwyn is probably the only other demigod who I find to be as intriguing as Miquella because we don't really encounter him. Sure, we find his soulless husk attached to the roots of the erdtree. Outside of that, all we know about him is that when the dragons attacked Leyndell, he was essentially the first line of defense. He led the famous defense of Leyndell, fighting the dragons to the last man until him and Fortisax sort of reached this truce and became bros. And because of his friendship with dragons, that allowed Fortisax's sister to turn into a human form and establish a dragon cult that was based around lightning, which the Golden Order itself was receptive to, and they made room for dragons within the Order. They were basically just putting back something that used to always be there in the first place, but I digress. In a way, Godwyn is single-handedly responsible for all the dragon memorabilia we see around the capital, along with the dragon incantations used by the knights, that sort of thing, and of course the presence of Lansax. Those are all directly tied to Godwyn. All I can think of besides that is the stuff that happened after the Knight of Black Knives. Godwyn and Ranni's death for that part were different than the average death. Ranni's flesh died, but her soul lingered on, and Godwyn's soul died, and his flesh lingered on. Sort of an equal exchange type of thing to make the ritual work, I'd assume. Godwyn essentially caught the biggest stray imaginable as part of a larger conspiracy of events. I mean, he was basically the sacrificial lamb. Now, I have my own theories regarding Queen Marika the Eternal's own involvement with the Knight of Black Knives, as well as her kind of banking on Miquella to be the one who wins this great game that followed. But I don't think Miquella was in on the Knight of Black Knives. Or if he did, Godwyn dying was never supposed to be part of the arrangement. That's my thought, at least. Mainly because of the golden epitaph blade, which was said to have been infused with the prayer of a young boy. "Oh brother, Lord brother, please die a true death." Now that kind of mirrors what the Finger Reader Maiden says in Deep Root Deaths about Godwyn not having died a true death, and that it was supposed to be different. For whatever the reason, the Knight of Black Knives doesn't appear to have went off as originally planned, and that could be Ranni just going off reservation to do her own thing, betraying everybody else involved, which I tend to think is the most likely of possibilities. And obviously Miquella isn't directly quoted in the Blade's description, it just says the prayer of a young boy, but the young boy is referring to Godwyn as his brother, and as we all know, Miquella was stuck in the body of a young boy, so it makes sense. Or I guess conversely though, Miquella could have known that Godwyn was supposed to be sacrificed for this all to work, and he just sort of felt bad about it and wanted to give him a true death to sort of right this wrong that he took part in. I think that would be a pretty interesting motivation as to why Miquella wants to revive his brother Godwyn so bad, is that his death could be one of Miquella's greatest regrets. This is obviously all speculation, but I definitely think it's a possibility. Anyway. Now, Godwyn obviously didn't die a true death, so when they laid him to rest at the roots of the erdtree, he sort of spread his death root all through it, and now we could even see his face on even the surface crabs. Well, the ones that happen to be positioned directly over the Prince of Death's throne, that is, but still. And not only that, the death root is spread all across the lands between, leading to Tibia mariners to try and presumably wrangle up these dead into their service. I don't know, it's causing a problem across the lands between what Godwyn's death root is doing. And Miquella, being a pretty big fan of his older half-brother and not wanting to see this death root spread throughout the lands between, devised a plan to resurrect him, or at the very least, give him that true death he'd always deserved. And to that end, he set up Castle Sol, a isolated fortress dedicated to the mysterious eclipse, which was allegedly designed to drain the sun of all of its power and restore one of Miquella's fallen comrades, who many believe to be Godwyn. But at the same time, though, there is a wandering mausoleum just out front of Castle Sol, and I can't help but wonder if this is the fallen comrade who Miquella, or at least the master of Castle Sol, is trying to resurrect, on behalf of Miquella, of course. But as I've said before, this mausoleum could be there as a trial run. If they can revive this guy, then they could probably revive or attempt to revive Godwyn. All in all, though, it doesn't seem to have worked. I mean, the demigod inside the mausoleum is still dead, and the garrison of the castle these days is made up of 2 chain lions, a bunch of tortured albinorics, a couple of snowbirds, and of course that's not to mention the entire complement of ghost exile soldiers and banished knights directly under the command of Punished Venom Snake from Metal Gear Solid 5, who in his boss fight is capable of summoning 2 of his ghost buddy knights to assist him. That fight's actually not that bad. It's one of the few ones where it feels fair if you use these spirit summons. Which reminds me, I've been making this new character to run through the game in preparation for the DLC, just in case my New Game Plus 7 guy is having too much trouble. And I decided the only spirit ash I would use is the Rotten Stray, just because it's kind of like going through the game having a pet dog, and what a lot of fun that has been. I mean, he dies fast, but if he procs that Scarlet Rot, it's like an instant win. I mean, maybe not instant, you do have to wait out the enemy, but it seems to last longer than the normal Scarlet Rot, and if you're doing it on a melee character, it's kind of just a nice little advantage. I mean, he usually gets killed before he procs it, but it's a lot of fun. It's like playing Pikmin and using white Pikmin, and when they get eaten, they poison their enemies. I don't know, it feels strategic in a way. Anyway, though, I'm getting off topic. So Castle Sol, for all intents and purposes, seems to have failed in its purpose of draining the sun of its energy and rejuvenating a dead demigod. And all this talk of rejuvenating or resurrecting a dead demigod reminds me of the candle tree. Now there's several depictions of the candle tree used as lighting sources found around the Halig tree, but from the candle tree shield we learn that it's said to represent the act of cardinal sin. Basically, it depicts the burning of the erdtree, and forgive me for this, I can't find the description anywhere, but I believe there's a prophecy of rebirth or resurrection that is associated with the Halig tree, and this could of course refer to Miquella being reborn, going into his cocoon as a kid and coming back as something else, as we see the roots even seem to be forming a new wooden godlike body for him if we take a look at the Halig tree. But all that progress was cut short when the Shattering hit. So as we all know, the Shattering is when shit hit the fan, for lack of a better term. America shattered the Elden Ring, and Radahn tried to repair it, and the demigods fought for the shards of it. Now, I imagine before he went into his full cocoon, he sent his sister Malenia after Radahn, who he needed gone for some specific reason, which of course has to do with the strongest primate high schooler keeping the stars in check and not allowing them to resume their movements because, well, we don't actually know why Radahn conquered the stars. He mastered gravity magic in part so he could still ride his horse after growing to a massive size, but his exact motive for holding the stars at bay really is up in the air. He could be doing it to protect Celia, he could also be doing it to lock the world in this sort of conflict state where none of the demigods can move up and become the god. Now, I don't really think that's the case either, but, we could save this speculation for another video. For whatever reason, Radahn conquered the stars, and Miquella sent his pit bull of a sister after him for it. And I am aware that there's another theory that Malenia is only attacking Caelid in search of Miquella, because as we know, where Miquella's cocoon wound up, the Mohg dynasty is right down below the Caelid wilds. So that's always a possibility, I suppose. But we'll talk more on how I think that played out in a few minutes when we get to that part of the story of Miquella's life. Either way, though, I think Malenia attacking Radahn has to have something to do with his holding hostage of the stars, because stars, as we know, are the demigod's fates, which turned out to be more literal than metaphorical. You can actually use Miquella's very fate in the form of amber starlight to attempt to drug Ranni the Witch. You know, so that Big Hat Rape Man can turn her into a puppet unsuccessfully and really just get himself killed and her mad at you. But the interesting thing is the location of this amber starlight. It's found at like a little statue of Malenia and Miquella surrounded by sacramental buds and, curiously enough, small land octopuses that appear to have been eating the sacramental buds because they also drop them, but only in this location. So that implies to me that Miquella has some sort of innate connection with the land octopus, which is certainly intriguing because, as we know, Miquella had this alter ego, or as it's referred to in the new trailer, this destiny to become this figure known as Saint Trina. And if we take a look at the torch of Saint Trina, it appears as though Saint Trina has an octopus on her head. Also, in a lot of places you find these land octopuses, you can also find nascent butterflies, which are often associated with Miquella because, well, mainly their description. They also seem to appear in places that are associated with Godwyn as well, and if you wanted to get abstract, the description of them could apply to both of the figures. Anyway, though, Miquella slept rather soundly as the wars of the Shattering raged on far from where he was at. And he was tucked away in the far corner of the world, pretty insulated from most threats. I mean, he had this whole Evergel, this complex, puzzle designed to, well, really make it difficult to enter his Haligtree. I mean, the thing was growing from the ocean off the northern coast, and its only access was through, like I said, this complex puzzle located in the ruins of Ordina Liturgical Town. And this Evergel was filled with Black Knife assassins, Albinoric archer women, and the presence of the assassins here leads me to believe that Miquella was given these women to protect him, presumably by his mother Marika, since she, as I said earlier, was probably banking on him winning this whole Shattering free-for-all event. I mean, he'd already started growing his version of the erdtree. He was well on his way to succeeding in this. But unfortunately for Miquella, his half-brother and omen maniac Mohg had other plans. So Mohg is the twin brother of Morgott and the younger brother of Godwyn. These guys were the true-born sons of Godfrey and Marika, and Mohg, much like his twin brother, was born an omen. But unlike Morgott, who sort of hated himself and despised that he was an abomination, Mohg let this he took pride in it. He let it power him up, if you will. And that made him susceptible to the interference of outer gods, in this case, the Formless Mother. A god presumably of blood and snakes. It has something to do with the great serpent Igle, I know that for sure, and it also seemingly has something to do with the dragon communion. But the Formless Mother told Mohg that his cursed blood was a blessing and sort of powered it up, made him even stronger, and gave him access to all this cool blood magic. And Mohg, now fully serving this foreign outer god that presumably is the reason the Land of Reeds is an unending bloody war, began making plays to stake his own claim to the lands between on behalf of this Formless Mother. And to this end he would find his way into the Haligtree past all of its defenses, which we still to this day don't know how he did, but there is some evidence. We have a portal that leads directly to the Dynasty Mausoleum located in the consecrated snowfield not far from Ordina, the only access point to the Haligtree. So perhaps he's responsible for that portal, and that's where he showed up. Then he proceeded to go through Ordina and go through all of the Haligtree to Miquella's cocoon, cut him out, and dip back out with him to his base. I mean, that's the only thing that really makes sense, is that he sort of snuck past all the defenses, or maybe he steamrolled past them. And after he went back to the Dynasty Mausoleum, he left some of the corrupted Albinorics behind to guard the portal, as it were. And obviously, Malenia's absence from the Haligtree at this time made this sort of impossibly easy for Mohg, I'd imagine. Now, after securing Miquella's cocoon, Mohg presumably gave him this very curious ring that seemingly depicts two serpents. And obviously the first thing that comes to mind is the twin-headed dragon Placidusix, but I think this is specifically referencing or depicting the Formless Mother, who we've seen has a close association with the serpent cult of Igle. And Mohg's goal, of course, here is to essentially uplift Miquella into godhood, replacing Queen Marika, and Mohg has stylized himself as the consort, the Elden Lord of Miquella. However, to quote the game's descriptions, no matter how much of his bloody bedchamber he tried to share with Miquella, the young empyrean's cocoon remained unresponsive. And when we see Mohg, he's sort of just hanging out in Miquella's blood. It's pretty gross. Talk about an invasion of one's privacy, especially if Miquella is described as unresponsive. I don't really have to spell out why that's all types of twisted. But what's interesting is that Miquella's body, his flesh, appears to have been abandoned by him, as the trailer suggests. The young Empyrean supposedly divested himself of everything. His great rune, his fate as Saint Trina, and presumably his Empyrean flesh, all in order to go to this mysterious Lands of Shadow and accomplish something. What? Well, we don't really know yet, and that's kind of the whole reason I wanted to make this video before the DLC came out, because it's really the last chance to cover pre-DLC Miquella. So it's not clear if Mohg's defiling of Miquella's abandoned corpse is going to have any effect on him in the Lands of Shadow, but he seems in some way still tied with his cocoon corpse, which again isn't described as dead. It's alive, but it's missing his soul, presumably, because that's what's running around in the Lands of Shadow, I'm guessing. It's all not very clear. So whether or not he's been affected by this tampering of Mohg's is really also unclear. I mean, I don't think it'll have any effect on him, especially if we killed Mohg, but honestly it can go either way. Now, I know a lot of people have likened Miquella, especially after these new trailers and art pieces have dropped, to Griffith from Berserk, and a lot of them believe he's going to like sacrifice all of these tarnished that have come into the Lands of Shadow looking for him. You know, the A-team that we see at the end of the trailer, who's supposedly already in the Lands of Shadow looking for him. I think if they go full Berserk reference, it'll probably be the lead knight of this group of tarnished that tries to sacrifice all the others to, I don't know, become Miquella's consort. That's some heavy speculation, though, and probably not the way things are going to go. I can't lie, though, that there was some heavy eclipse imagery there with that shot in the trailer of, I'm assuming, America forming the Lands Between, or forming the Golden Order. But I think that's more of a visual reference, if nothing else. I mean, Caelid to me looks like it's a world that's constantly under the eclipse from Berserk, or in the after effects of it, but I'm already getting off subject. So if I had to guess as to what Miquella's up to in the mysterious Lands of Shadow without really any information other than what we have, he could feel that he needs to either cleanse it or take over it or rid it of Mesmer before he can truly establish his new world logic, because that's not something you want to have to worry about spilling into your new utopia, right? Like your crazy, I'm assuming, half-brother of some kind, Mesmer, showing up who's bound with snakes. Although the Lands of Shadow seem to just be housing all the things that were deemed impure by the erdtree, something Miquella himself would go on to do with a lot of the things found in the consecrated snowfield and the Halleck tree. It's all very paradoxical. But my main guess is that he needs to come to these Lands of Shadows to fix something, to rid them of something, or perhaps he needs assistance. Because as we saw, his Halleck tree didn't work out, but again, that could just be because he was cut out of it too early, or perhaps Malenia's rot, infected it. I don't know, we'll find out in, probably like, 3 or 4 days. That's me assuming this will be up by then. It will be. But I think that's it. I think that's all I wanted to cover. I like to think of this video as sort of like a recap on everything the young demigod had done, or at the very least is associated with, and I think I got everything. Of course, if I missed anything, please let me know in the comments. If you have any alternate theories, also share those. I love reading them. And of course, if you like the video, please like it. If you dislike it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me ramble on about various lore topics, and soon some movies too, I'm going to be talking movies very soon as well, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out. We're just about to crack that 26K, which of course is a big deal to me. But enough of that. Let's have our outro, shall we? And then some final thoughts. I almost forgot, there's a number of crafting materials that are associated with Miquella. I talked earlier a bit about the nascent butterflies and how they seem to be associated with Miquella, but also possibly Godwyn. This could be, of course, because Miquella must have studied a great deal about the death rites of old in an attempt to resurrect Godwyn. Presumably stuff like the ghost flame and the deathbird magic, but also possibly the magic and mysterious nature of the ancestral followers. They also have a lot to do with resurrection and life through death. And again, while that does usually seem to be the domain of Godwyn and those who live within death, if Miquella really did put together Castle Sol in an effort to resurrect a dead demigod, he must have known a whole hell of a lot about how the death rites worked. This is probably something I should have mentioned earlier, but it found its way into the final thoughts.
I found something.
There's also the sacramental buds, which could either be a result of Miquella divesting himself of everything, or a side effect of Mohg tampering with Miquella's divine flesh. But aside from those, there's also two different kinds of lily that he is associated with. The first and foremost is, of course, the Miquella's lily, golden color, obviously. The other is representative of his fate that he actually divested himself of and cast away as Saint Trina, and they are referred to as Saint Trina's lilies, or Trina lilies. Both Miquella lilies and Trina lilies can be found places where wildlife is sleeping, like in the Mistwood ruins, and also that friendly dog in Landell as well. I believe there's a couple of Miquella lilies around him. Now, they're obviously very similar in appearance. The Miquella lily is described as being made of unalloyed gold, which is very interesting. The flower is said to signify the faith in the Hallig tree, and as far as I know, it's only used to craft one thing, the bewitching branch, which has the very interesting property of turning your foe into a temporary ally after you've used it on him, which sort of seems like an echo of Miquella's ability to compel affection in any he encountered. The Trina lily, on the other hand, which is stark white, is sort of a mild tranquilizer in many ways, which probably explains why we find so many creatures sleeping near them. And naturally, they've got a few more functions and uses than the Miquella lily. You can make sleep arrows, sleep darts, sleep bolts, basically anything to put the enemies to sleep, which is what Saint Trina was associated with. But I think that's all of my lore-based final thoughts. So I'm shooting for a day of the DLC release date for a certain anticipated video I've been working on, but of course we'll have to see how that plays out. All in all, I think this one will be a fun one to look back on, as will a lot of the videos I had regarding the Omens post DLC. You know, just to see how many things I was wrong about. You know, that's always a fun thing, or right about. You know, that's the upside of it, the silver lining. But I just had a lot of setbacks in the past month and a half. A lot of family things come up. I don't even really like to talk about that. But they've slowed my video production a little bit down. But I'm sort of, I'm thinking at the end of the dark tunnel and can actually start working on videos pretty frequently again. Especially once the DLC comes out proper. I still got a lot of other videos planned too, like Fallout, Elder Scrolls, some movie stuff. I don't know if I want to even qualify this as the first of the weekly or bi-weekly rants that I'm going to do, but if it is, then this will be it. Yeah, no, I mean, this might as well be one. This was actually a little more structured than the rants are probably usually going to go, even though this one probably got a little rambly at times, which honestly, it's what I'm known for. It's what I'm good at, you know, rambling. But I think the biggest takeaway we'll have from the DLC, besides stuff regarding the Omens and the Crucible, which I'm sure we're going to learn a lot about, is whether or not Miquella was as good of a guy as they say he was. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of his descriptions paint him in this, really positive light, but there's this underlying tone of not necessarily sinisterness, but his styling himself as a champion of the bastards and broken things could be, if nothing else, not without ulterior motives. Not saying it's all a manipulation, which it very well could be, but I do think it's safe to assume that this reputation he's cultivated for himself is a means to an end. Maybe he really is just trying to round up all the things that the Golden Order couldn't quote-unquote help, the things it excluded and considered cursed, because it reminded him of the plight of his sister, who was born with this incurable rot sickness that could potentially spread across the lands between in a similar manner, but probably a lot quicker than the death root. He could either be a good guy or a bad guy. It's really tough to say. I think it's skewed more to him being a good guy, but, there could be some ulterior motives there. We'll have to wait and see. But until then, I guess that's where I'm going to leave things. I will see you guys soon with my much anticipated nameless video, shaping up to be pretty good. But of course, until then, I hope everybody stays safe and, has a good day. Happy Father's Day, if I get this one out on time. Anyways, though, as always, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.